Hi, my name is Kat Hicks. I'm a senior in the philosophy department at UCA, and I am honored to be presenting for the second time at the Quoined Corner Conference. My presentation this year centers on philosophy of language and my take on linguistic relativity. In order to construct this argument, we'll explore both cognitive function and culture. Relativity can be a tricky subject for philosophers. Because it is a claim about empirical relationships, it requires empirical evidence. I provide references to experts in philosophy, neuroscience, and anthropology, which I hope will satisfy this challenge. In its simplest form, my claim is: culture influences cognition, cognition encodes language, and language then feeds back to influence culture. Simple as that appears, it is a wonderfully complex claim. To tackle it, I will examine Ruth Millikan's theory of biosemantics, Dr. Evelina Fredrenko and Rosemary Varley's work in neuroimaging and neurology, which distinguish between thought and language processing in the human brain's hardware, Daoism in ancient Chinese language, and work from anthropologist Laura Bohannon with the African Tein. The mechanism for this theory is as follows. Cognitive function produces language. In order for this to be true, cognition has to precede language. Then language has to biologically evolve to promote safety and survival. And then thought and reasoning must occur independent of language processing. Then culture, born from language, reciprocally influences cognition. In order to examine this relationship, we'll look at how language encodes culture through Daoism in ancient Chinese, and we'll look at how culture influences language through Laura Bohannon's work with the African Tein. First, cognition precedes language. Encoding meaning without syntax. This could look like body language, emotional intelligence, or experiential processing, but it's likely most clearly apparent in infants. Different tones and tongue positions produce different kinds of cries for different purposes: hunger, discomfort, the desire to move, etc. Then decoding meaning without syntax. Mothers experience physiological responses to their infant sounds, which also shows that meaning can be transferred without any conscious intent on the part of the speaker. Another example of this is in animal communication. For example, beavers will smack their tails on the surface of water to warn their kin of danger. This act clearly communicates significant meaning, but without any linguistic syntactic structure. Without language, intentionality, or internal effort, meaning can be transmitted from one party to another. And this leads us to Ruth Millikan's theory of biosemantic externalism. This is a naturalist theory in which language is the adapted mechanism by which we increase safety and survival. It also suggests that meaning is external to those who encode and decode it. Biosemantic externalism posits that language is biologically evolved. Language and mind are both derived from natural phenomena, i.e. evolution. Thus, semantics are evolutionarily derived. Our brains pick up and process information about surroundings and internal experiences in order to maximize survival. And expressing information is an adapted mechanism to further that goal. Millikan's theory of biosemantics is not inconsistent with my brand of linguistic relativity. The input process of learning the world occurs within a societal framework as a result of our biology as socially embedded beings. So what does neuroscience have to say? Dr. Evelina Fredrenko and Rosemary Varley examine the relationship between language and 5 cognitive abilities believed to share neural machinery with language. These included arithmetic processing, executive function, music processing, theory of mind, and spatial awareness. They found clear dissociations observed in fMRI studies and the preserved abilities of at least some severely aplastic individuals to engage in complex non-linguistic reasoning tasks. Aplastic individuals are those unable to process language or speak it. And I've actually observed this phenomena in some friends with aphasia, which is a less severe form of the same problem. So what does this mean? This suggests that thought is independent of language. Executive function, arithmetic and music processing, spatial awareness, and cognitive function occur independently of language processing. Damage to regions of selective language processing affects an individual's ability to understand and produce language, but not to engage in many forms of complex thought, such as logical reasoning, memory, etc. Again, this is compatible with Millikan. Thought precedes and is fundamental to language, but once language is established through evolutionary processes, it becomes reciprocally influential on thought, just as any other external or environmental stimuli influences our thoughts about the world. We've seen philosophical and neuroscientific evidence so far, so let's shift towards observations of culture. Chinese language provides a rich history of an evolving society. Daoism was embraced as a path to harmony, and we have already argued for the separation of thought and language, which Daoism reflects. It treats language as limited, always trailing behind truth, and our comprehension of it. For ancient China, language was intended to guide action with the goal of societal harmony. It was not intended as a vehicle for truth. Rather, it served a functional and pragmatic role, conveying relationship dynamics while defining the subject-predicate composition of most modern languages. A perfect example of this is the concept Tein, or heaven. It is simultaneously pictographic and ideographic. The character represents its physical referent, as well as an idea about that referent. This symbol is a combination of many others. Underneath the top horizontal line are symbols for man or person and the number 2. Combined, these symbols create the character for Ren, or humaneness and shared humanity. With the top line integrated, the symbol means something like all compassionate beings under heaven, which displays both connective dynamics between individuals in a shared space and their place within nature. I believe the symbol of yin and yang, as well as the hexagrams from the I Ching, are also of significance to this argument. This picture not only denotes the integral relationship between opposites, it gives us a binary counting system. And this is relevant to Dr. Fredrenko and her study and the particular results that she and her team discovered regarding arithmetic processing. Linguistic processing regions of the brain are not active when solving lower-level math problems, nor when engaging in greater estimate mathematic reasoning. So arithmetic processing occurs apart from language. These core abilities are shared across species and are present in pre-linguistic infants. Consequently, the autonomy of these core numerical abilities has not been controversial. What she's saying here is that mathematic reasoning and language occur separately. And so math as a cognitive function can be traced here as influencing the development of language. The way that we speak about mathematics occurs in different ways. For ancient China, the hexagrams denoted a binary counting system. That's a base 2 counting system. We can observe various counting systems throughout different cultures in history. For example, right now, the most popular on Earth is the metric system, the base 10. And that suggests that, as I said, cognition precedes and influences the development of language. What I hope I've been able to portray here is that language encodes culture. Historical context tells us that Chinese culture likely prioritized harmony in response to the extended warring states period that preceded Taoist philosophy. This influenced concepts of morality, which became systematized into sets of norms that allowed for coexistence. This process results in unique collective cultures, some more collaborative than others. Once again, this assessment is compatible with Millikan. Biology impacts the evolution of language, and in the case of humans, our biology demands cohabitation. As such, culture becomes a key environmental input. Culture is rooted in our biological needs, but once evolved, it becomes part of our surroundings. It's a significant external influence on our decision-making, and it affects the goal of safety and survival. Culture and language have a reciprocal relationship, resulting in unique societal systems. Evidence from Fedorenko's study suggests that language could be impacted by cognitive control, then further refined by shared goals established through the act of communication. Ancient Chinese embodies this, as its characters are both ideographic and pictographic, yet rely on connectivity to establish labels for the world, rather than separations between subjects and objects. As I'm sure most of you are aware, linguistic relativity is not a new claim. Daoism is one of the oldest examples. Dao is empty. It is never exhausted. This quote comes from Lao Tzu, who is credited as being the father of Daoism, though he may be more of a legend than an actual historical figure. Within Daoism, there is the philosophy of namelessness. The true nature of the universe is entirely beyond description and comprehension. Even words themselves change over time, so language is always left behind the permanence and complexity of truth. Therefore, language will never be an accurate representation of the world as it is. Labels themselves are a divisive force of categorization, chopping up the wholeness of nature into objects of human perception and relations. Chinese language is also nominalistic, holding that concepts and ideas without physical reference are non-existent, but that non-existence does not render them useless. So how can we reflect on these propositions through the lens of neuroscience? What we learned from Dr. Fedorenko's work is that goal-oriented sections of the brain overlap with language responsiveness regions. This overlap could potentially produce a way of communicating that helped maintain the Chinese cosmology of unity, maximized harmony, developed human ontology, and guided the action of individuals in their various roles in family, work, and society. The popularized Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of linguistic relativity claims that cultural metaphysics are determined by the limits of spoken language. But as we've seen so far, Chinese metaphysics inhabits the fabric of existence, and it is a limit of language to not be able to encapsulate it. This is the opposite of what Edward Sapir claimed about the Hopi tribe, but his evidence has since been challenged and rebuffed for poor research methods. So let's take a look at a more contemporary example. It is actually from 1966, but that is still more contemporary than ancient Chinese. Language plays a key role in the functional feedback loop between the body and the world, and culture is the amalgamation of individuals sharing this feedback experience. This would suggest that communication can either promote cooperation or break down intelligibility, and this is exactly what anthropologist Laura Bohannon discovered in her immersive stay with the Tein in West Africa. She attempted to tell the tale of Hamlet, but was met with many challenges. For example, the Tein view ghosts as omens, not as talking entities. They did not understand how anyone could be driven mad unless they had been bewitched, and they became heavily concerned with identifying the perpetrator of this imagined curse. It also became difficult for the Tein to understand monogamy or unskilled hunters. Bohannon was forced to adapt many of the concepts in Hamlet to be comprehensible for the Tein, but this did not solve the problem of motives. and after she finished the story, the Teve elders retold Hamlet back to her and corrected her very few mistakes. This process of cooperation and breakdown does not equate to one party being correct while the other is wrong. Rather, what we observe from Bohannon's experience is that she and the Teve collaborated to reach a new understanding, one which changed the meaning of Shakespeare's classic Hamlet. Her experience with the Teve is the perfect example of individuals having different senses of the same referent, a referent being whatever the object of designation may be. It also shows how negotiation becomes a process for mutual conceptual engineering. As mentioned in my introduction, linguistic relativity is tasked with providing empirical evidence to back its claims about worldly relationships. These relationships are difficult to study due to the impossibility of isolating certain cognitive functions from others. However, any research attempts moving forward would likely benefit from interdisciplinary participation for exactly those reasons. I hope that despite my limited resources, I have been able to provide enough evidence to satisfy the needs for this theory. In conclusion, the pragmatism of ancient Chinese linguistics is a good solution to my struggle against truth conditions being essential to meaning. However, my theory of linguistic relativity designates meaning as external and our ability to speak on it as negotiated, and this is not compatible with the whole of Daoism. Negotiations may be internal or external, but they are inevitably relative to cultural impacts on cognitive functions, including those with non-linguistic forms. And this is a look at my references. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Now go and influence some minds.